Marcus Chun had seen enough war to last 3 lifetimes. 20 years in the Terran Defense Corps, fighting across 12 different star systems, watching friends die on alien worlds whose names he could barely pronounce. Now, at 42, he worked maintenance on Kepler Station, a massive trading hub that floated in the neutral zone between human and Zephyrian space. The job was simple: keep the environmental systems running, fix broken air recyclers, make sure the artificial gravity generators didn't decide to quit during peak trading hours. It was peaceful work, and peace was exactly what Marcus needed after 2 decades of violence. Kepler Station buzzed with activity every day. Merchants from dozens of species hawked their wares in the central marketplace. The air smelled like a mixture of exotic spices, recycled oxygen, and the metallic tang of spacecraft fuel. Marcus had grown used to the chaos, the different languages, the strange customs. He kept his head down, did his job, and tried not to think about the past. The Zephyrians were the newest species to join the Galactic Trade Consortium. They looked almost human, except for their pale blue skin and large, dark eyes that seemed to hold ancient wisdom. Their children, however, were unmistakably alien. Small and fragile, with oversized heads and thin limbs, they moved with careful precision as if the station's artificial gravity was too heavy for their delicate frames. Marcus first noticed the little Zephyrian girl on a Tuesday morning. She sat alone in the corner of the station's food court, a small metal lunchbox clutched in her tiny hands. While other alien children played and laughed with their parents nearby, she remained isolated, staring down at her unopened meal container with an expression that looked remarkably like sadness. The girl couldn't have been more than 8 years old in human terms, though Marcus knew Zephyrian aging worked differently. Her dark blue hair was braided with small silver beads that caught the artificial sunlight streaming through the observation windows. She wore a simple gray outfit that looked clean but worn, as if it had been carefully maintained despite its age. Marcus tried to ignore the scene as he walked past, carrying his toolkit toward the broken waste disposal unit near the food court. But something about the child's posture nagged at him. She held the lunchbox like it was precious, yet she never opened it. She just sat there, alone, while the busy station continued its daily rhythm around her. "Focus on your work," Marcus muttered to himself. He'd learned long ago that getting involved in other people's problems usually led to trouble. The war had taught him that caring too much could get you killed, or worse, get the people you cared about killed. But over the next few days, Marcus kept seeing the girl. Always in the same spot, always with the same metal lunchbox, always alone. Her parents were nowhere to be seen. Sometimes she would arrive early in the morning and stay until late evening, never eating, never playing, just sitting quietly with that unopened container. The other Zephyrian families seemed to avoid her. When Marcus paid closer attention, he noticed how they would deliberately choose tables far from where she sat. Their children were forbidden from approaching her. Even the human vendors who sold food in the court would look uncomfortable when she walked past their stalls. Marcus had worked on enough diverse stations to recognize the signs. The girl was an outcast, possibly orphaned, definitely unwanted. The neat but worn clothing, the careful way she moved to avoid drawing attention, the invisible barrier that seemed to exist between her and everyone else. He'd seen it before among human refugees during the war. On Friday, Marcus's curiosity finally got the better of him. He finished repairing a faulty oxygen sensor near the food court and found himself walking toward the girl's usual table. She looked up as he approached, her large dark eyes widening with what looked like fear. "Hello," Marcus said softly, crouching down to her eye level. "I'm Marcus. I work here on the station." The girl didn't respond. She clutched her lunchbox tighter and seemed to shrink back in her chair. Marcus could see now that her clothes were even more worn than he'd first thought. There were careful patches sewn into the fabric, and her shoes had been resoled multiple times. "I've seen you here every day," Marcus continued, keeping his voice gentle. "Are you waiting for someone?" Still no response. The girl's eyes darted around the food court as if looking for an escape route. Marcus noticed that her hands were trembling slightly as she held the lunchbox. "That's a nice lunchbox," he said, nodding toward the metal container. "May I ask what you have for lunch today?" For the first time, the girl spoke. Her voice was barely above a whisper, and she spoke in accented Standard Galactic that suggested she was still learning the language. "Nothing," she said simply. Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. "Nothing." The girl looked down at the lunchbox in her hands. "Is empty. Always empty. But I pretend. I pretend like other children." The words hit Marcus harder than enemy artillery ever had. This child was coming to the food court every day with an empty lunchbox, pretending to eat lunch so she could feel normal, so she could be around other families even if she couldn't be part of them. "What's your name?" Marcus asked, his voice rougher than he intended. "Zara," the girl whispered. "Zara, where are your parents?" She was quiet for a long moment. When she finally answered, her voice was even smaller than before. "They are gone. The sickness took them last year. Now I live in the lower decks with the other forgotten ones." Marcus knew about the lower decks. Every station had them, the areas where refugees, orphans, and other unwanted individuals scraped together some kind of existence in the shadows. The station authorities usually looked the other way as long as the inhabitants stayed out of sight and didn't cause trouble. "Have you eaten today, Zara?" She shook her head. "Yesterday." Another shake. Marcus felt his carefully built walls starting to crumble. This wasn't his problem. He had his own demons to deal with, his own ghosts from the war. He couldn't take on responsibility for a Zephyrian orphan. It wasn't practical, it wasn't safe, and it definitely wasn't something he was equipped to handle. But as he looked at Zara sitting there with her empty lunchbox, pretending to be just another child having lunch with her family, Marcus found himself thinking about all the times during the war when someone had helped him when they didn't have to. The medic who'd pulled him out of a burning transport. The civilian family who'd hidden him from enemy patrols for 3 days. The fellow soldier who'd shared his rations when supply lines were cut. "Zara," Marcus said, making a decision that surprised him. "Would you like to have some real lunch today?" The girl looked up at him with those huge dark eyes, and for the first time since he'd been watching her, Marcus saw something that looked like hope. "You would do this?" she asked. "For me? But I am nothing. I am forgotten." Marcus stood up slowly, his knees protesting after years of combat injuries. "Nobody is nothing, Zara, and you're definitely not forgotten. Not anymore." He extended his hand toward her. After a moment's hesitation, she placed her tiny blue hand in his calloused human one. The metal lunchbox remained on the table, empty as always, but somehow it no longer seemed like a symbol of loneliness. Instead, it was beginning to represent something else entirely, the start of an unexpected connection between a battle-scarred human veteran and a forgotten alien child. As they walked toward the food vendors together, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that his carefully ordered, isolated life was about to become much more complicated. But for the first time in years, that didn't seem like such a bad thing. The other patrons of the food court watched them go, the grizzled human maintenance worker and the small Zephyrian outcast. Some looked disapproving, others simply curious. But Marcus didn't care about their opinions. All that mattered was the small hand in his, and the spark of hope he'd seen in a child's eyes. He had no idea that this simple act of kindness would soon ripple outward in ways he couldn't imagine, touching lives across the station and beyond. Sometimes the smallest gestures create the largest changes, and sometimes an empty lunchbox can become the beginning of something beautiful. The war had taught Marcus how to destroy things. Maybe it was time he learned how to build something instead. Word traveled fast on Kepler Station. By the next morning, half the station knew that Marcus Chun, the quiet human maintenance worker, had bought lunch for the Zephyrian outcast girl. The reactions were mixed, ranging from mild approval to outright hostility. Marcus discovered this when he arrived at work to find Station Administrator Corval waiting by his tool locker. The Centaurian official's 4 arms were crossed in a gesture that clearly indicated displeasure. "Chun," Corval's translator caller rendered his chittering speech into clipped Standard Galactic. "We need to discuss your activities yesterday." Marcus continued, loading his tool belt, not looking up. If this is about the overtime I put in fixing the recycler in Section C, I already logged it properly. This is about the Zephyrian child. Now Marcus did look up. Corval's compound eyes were focused intently on him, and his mandibles clicked in what Marcus had learned was the Centaurian equivalent of frown. What about her? The child is not your responsibility, Chun. She is problematic. Her presence in the public areas causes discomfort among the paying customers.